Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona. It's time for Valley Business Radio, spotlighting the Valley's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Hello and welcome to Valley Business Radio, where we tell the stories that traditional media tends to ignore and help connect you to the right people. I'm your host, Dr. Adrian McIntyre, and I'm joined in the studio today for a wonderful conversation about U.S.-Mexico business relationships and opportunities. Indira Jeffrey is a binational U.S. and Mexican entrepreneur. She's a business development partner with EKATAR USA and also a leader with the Global Chamber. Welcome, Indira.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for having me today here. And yes, I'm very happy to share this platform with my two connationals. In EKATAR, I'm the partner and business owner. What we do, we do marketing for the Hispanic market. We focus on the Hispanic market. And my background is also in finance and international trade.
Marvelous. And I want to learn more about all of those things and how they affect the current state of business between the U.S. and Mexico. Also joining us is Gabriela Castro, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Trade in Motion, a business consulting firm. Welcome, Gabriela.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm glad that you're here. And our third guest is Eduardo González, president at 258 Consulting. Welcome, Eduardo.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for having us.
Indira, you already started down this path a little bit, and I'd love you to continue. Tell us more about your work and a bit about your background. This will help us understand some of the key issues we need to flesh out over the course of this conversation. What is EKATAR and what is your role? And then we'll use that as a way to begin exploring the topic.
Absolutely. Yes, EKATAR is a marketing company. The main office are in Mexico. And we do international marketing, basically. Here in the United States, the company is called EKATAR USA. And we focus in the Hispanic market. What we do, we help companies that are based in the United States, and if they like to target the Hispanic or Latinos, we help them with their advertising, and we do social media, we do marketing campaigns, marketing research, and also for companies that are in Mexico that would like to come to the United States, we help them in the transition of the cross-cultural communication, mainly, and also to target their, in this case, if they are coming from Mexico, to target the American market.
Wonderful. And there's a lot of nuance and specificity to many of those challenges, both marketing challenges, operational challenges, cross-border supply chain relations. We're going to get into some of the details in this conversation. But you mentioned you have a background in banking and finance. You had a 20-year career with many of the biggest financial services companies in the world, held a number of different roles. How does that background shape your approach to this kind of business development?
Well, actually, I think it's the basic of everything, finance. Because you have to do with money and deal with money for your whole life. I started working for HSBC in Mexico back in 1996. And I started working as a private banker. So I started on that role, knowing more about what it is, the finance environment, also how that will affect the economy, how the banks affect the economy, and what is a central bank. A lot of people, they don't know there is a central bank in all the countries. I also work for another bank where I was the correspondent banking. For that bank, I used to go to different banks to create good relationships with the other banks and to have the line of credits working. Here in the United States, I work for JP Morgan Chase and Charles Schwab. That helped me a lot with improving my background in finance.
That's certainly where the rubber meets the road for businesses, both in terms of their survival, their access to capital, their ability to generate revenue, turn a profit, all the things that really matter in the lifeblood of business. You're also a leader with the Global Chamber. Which is the reason why we're all gathered together today. Doug Brunke and the Global Chamber arranged a series of these kind of conversations, really highlighting international dimensions of our work here in the Valley. Can you tell us a little bit about the Global Chamber and give us some background? We'll come back to this, of course, but what would be your introduction to the Global Chamber for people who've never heard of it?
The Global Chamber is chamber of commerce. We can tell that, where the main objective is to connect people, to connect people with interest in any kind of negotiations, or also people that they would like to expand their business, or people they would like to export or import. Fortunately, we have many kind of different directors and leaders from different industries in the Global Chamber. And it's not just in the United States. We have more than 200 offices around the world. And that is the beauty of this chamber, that you can connect from, if you are in the United States, you can connect with people in Africa, in Mexico, in Argentina. And it doesn't matter what kind of industry you are in, we will find someone to connect you and to help you.
Yes, it's a global network, 525 metropolitan areas, 195 countries. That's almost all of them.
Yes.
Country-wise anyway, not cities. But it's really something I'm looking forward to learning more about and finding more opportunity to connect with professionals and business leaders in many other places. Let's turn for a minute to Gabriela Castro. Tell us a little bit about your work. Tell us about Trade in Motion and the kind of things you do, the problems you solve, the people you serve.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. Thank you. Trade in Motion is a business consulting firm incorporated in Arizona, and we support companies to do business in North America. That being said, we support companies to do business in the US, Mexico, and Canada. And the sectors that we manage are mining, automotive, aerospace, and clean technologies. The sector in which we have the most of expertise is mining. As you know, Mexico has a big tradition of mining since like 500 years ago. And there's a lot of mining activity. In fact, 68% of mining investment in Mexico from foreign companies. There is 68% of investment from foreign companies in the mining sector, which is $1.4 billion US. And Mexico is the first producer of silver worldwide. That's why I manage this sector. I like it. I think that the world needs mining. If not, we could not have a mobile.
Right.
We could not have a car. We could not have many things if mining would not exist.
We had a wonderful conversation in this studio a few weeks ago about water. It's one of those things that we all need, for life as well as for business. And yet it's something we often take for granted. We don't ask ourselves, where does this come from? How does it get here? Who manages it along the way? What do we need to do to be responsible stewards of this limited resource, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the same can be said for the extractive industries and that produce the raw material that drives so much of the way we do things in this world. Your exposure to this originally seems to have started many years ago when you served for 15 years as a trade commissioner with the Embassy of Canada in Mexico, and began to deal with a lot of Canadian mining companies and supporting their operations in Mexico. So you're coming at this from this, as many of the folks in this room, you're bridging the public sector, private companies, small and medium-sized businesses. Can you share a little bit about that experience and how it shaped the way you work now?
Exactly. Yeah. I have an international background. As you said, I used to work for the Canadian Embassy in Mexico City, and we supported Canadian companies to do business in Mexico, which is great. I love business. I will tell you something. My first career is music. I'm a trumpet player. And after I switched to business, because working at the Canadian Embassy, I fell in love about business. I love it. I love to do business with people who like to do business.
You know, I can really see the connection there. As someone with musical inclinations, although I never was a serious student, unfortunately, there's something about orchestrating the complexity of an ensemble or of a large orchestra. Each note has a place in producing the greater body of work. I could really understand where somebody with your special training and talent would find business fascinating. What is it about the world of business that you discovered you like so much?
I like to serve people. I like to serve the world. And it's great to see a company approaching you to ask for help, to help them and to see the results. That's what I love. I'm here to serve the companies, to serve people, to serve everybody. And when you see the results, when you take the client to the hand of the client and said, okay, let's go together. We go together. We do it all together. I'm here to serve you. And when you see that they are getting into the market, they are selling, they are getting money, and as in the mining sector, and they are contributing to the communities, they are building things for them, they are giving people a better life. For me, that's the thing. It's really great.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, even in industries that have been challenged around topics of the environment, around corporate social responsibility, around the relationship with local labor, I see so many opportunities for some of the biggest companies in the world to really do good and do well by people, the people they employ, the people they serve, the communities they support. Obviously, there's a spectrum from, you know, the worst actors to the best actors. But as we all try to grow up together on this one planet of ours, I think having many of these companies take the lead is clearly a huge opportunity. We'll come back to some of those details. Eduardo González, you're the president of 258 Consulting, but you also have a lot of government experience. Give us a little bit of an overview of your background and then the work you're doing now.
Do we have time?
We do.
Okay. I'm kidding. I started my career 24 years ago working for the Mexico Development Bank. I had the opportunity there to work in Mexico, in the U.S., and in Europe. I was posted in the Netherlands for 6 years. And then after that, I worked for another Mexican government agency called ProMexico. Did that for 9 years. And my most recent post was opening the Phoenix office, which we did 4 years ago. Currently, I am the president and founder of 258 Consulting. It's a consulting firm that helps companies nearshore their manufacturing operations. We also help under international business development, Mexican companies and U.S. companies. And we also help on the contract manufacturing search. So basically what we do is if a company is looking to bring into North America their manufacturing, we help them do that in an efficient way. And the idea behind it is that we think that North America is a region that it is more competitive if we partner between us with competing in a global marketplace, and we don't see the region as competing. So we see each other as partnering.
Now, the name 258 refers to something specific. Talk a little about that and why that's important, why that's symbolic.
Sure. So 258 are the border monuments still standing between Mexico and the U.S. So these monuments were set around the middle of the 1800s, and they go from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Pacific.
These are stone monuments, obelisks.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. They have different shapes, different designs, but yeah, most of them are obelisks. And I think it's a nice way to mark the border between two countries instead of having fences and walls.
Walls and things we hear a lot about these days. You know, I was fascinated when you first mentioned that at an event the Global Chamber put on that I attended, where you and I first had a conversation, because I, as a college student working in the Middle East, was doing some archaeology projects in what was the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire, what is now Israel, Jordan, Syria. And there are remains of Roman border markings and highway markings that can still be found out there in the desert, and outposts. You know, it's very hard to manage an empire that extensive as the Romans discovered, and as other empires have and are discovering today. Imperial overstretch is a logistics problem.
Exactly.
Which I know is something that's close to your heart. But I like that idea that you're marking your own company's work with a reference to something, a time when there was fluidity. There was still a distinct border, if you will, but it was a border marked, not so much monitored and policed in the way that we're doing it now. Let's transition a bit, and please feel free to include more of your own background and insights from specific things you've been involved with. But let's talk now topically about the business environment between the United States and Mexico. Certainly here in Arizona, this is something that is of prime importance. Mexico is Arizona's largest trading partner, and not by a small amount, something 4 times greater than the second place trading partner. Can you, any of you, speak to, in a very general way, some of the issues? Obviously, the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement is certainly relevant and timely right now. But beyond that, there's a lot people may not realize about the extensive business relationships between these two countries. So let's talk in a very general way, first of all, about the types of businesses that show up in this lens when we're looking at the world of business through U.S.-Mexico partnerships. What kind of companies are we talking about?
Well, I can fill into that because due to what I do, I have to deal with a lot of kind of companies. But what I can tell is that a lot of people nowadays, they are asking why to invest in Mexico. Well, we can, just relate to the proximity between the United States and Mexico. We are neighbors forever. And but also we can tell that in Mexico there is a population of more than 230 million. And from that, the income of everyone is increasing. Also, despite of all the activities that have been occur on the last days, Mexico's macroeconomic stability is great. We have a growing consumer base. Also, the rising of the skilled labor pool is very good. And mostly Mexico is always a welcome foreign investment as in the United States. So I can, yes, with that, and also the good relationship between both countries has to do with, why not to do business between both countries.
Gabriela, a minute ago, you mentioned mining specifically, but of course there are other types of companies, small and large, that are concerned with U.S.-Mexico relations, either because they make things in Mexico that are sold to the United States. Automotive comes to mind as probably the largest piece of that pie in terms of both imports and exports. But there are other companies as well. I'm really wanting to flesh out the picture here so people can get a sense of, what kinds of businesses are we talking about? When we talk about U.S.-Mexico business relationships, what are the big buckets?
As you said, the automotive sector is huge. And only to give some numbers, the U.S. goods and services trade with Mexico total $671 billion US dollar, which is huge. The exports were last year almost 300 billion, and imports were 371, which is big, and you can see the big trade between both countries. And you know what I noticed coming? I'm from Mexico City, so when I moved to the U.S. to Arizona, I discovered a big nation, if we say, between the north of Mexico and the south of the U.S. If you see both borders, people are similar. Many people in the border of Mexico, they speak English as Americans, and people in the south of the U.S., they speak Spanish as Mexicans. It's really getting like closer, even if there's a border in the middle.
That's a really important point, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because what we're talking about is at some level, very high level relationships between federal governments, trade agreements, things of that nature. But we're also then talking about very specific on the ground regional dynamics. And certainly that's something we are enmeshed in as a living reality here in Arizona, also Southern California, where I'm from, also New Mexico and Texas. There is a region, and I think most people don't realize that this is very similar to our relationship with Canada. My wife is Canadian, and I've come to learn over the years that 95% of the population of Canada, which is much smaller than the population of Mexico, it's actually smaller than the population of California. But 95% of the population of Canada lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border. We are talking about a border family, if you will, on the northern side. We ought to be talking about our southern border in the exact same way. There is a set of connections historically, linguistically, culturally, and commercially that really matter and have to be dealt with the nuance appropriate to those kind of long, deep relationships. Eduardo González, you also have a unique insight into this. Can you give us your take on what's the scope of business between the U.S. and Mexico? How would we begin to wrap our heads around? This is a very complex topic. We're not going to be able to do justice in an hour.
Right.
But give us a sense of some of the big categories or key themes in this relationship.
Sure. So between Mexico and Arizona, there's close to 17 billion trade in goods, back and forth. The main products that are transferred between the borders mainly is agriculture is the number one. So you got a lot of fresh produce coming from Mexico, especially from the state of Sinaloa. And then you have the breakdown goes from transport equipment, electric equipment, and other types of electric components. So what that means is that components come from the U.S. Into Mexico, and those components maybe are from the U.S. or maybe from other regions of the world. And then they get transformed into a finished product into Mexico, and then you get finished products from Mexico into the U.S. or maybe other components for bigger parts. So you got,
And there's a unique aspect of this as well, which I'm not as familiar with. I'd love you and the other panelists to speak to, which is the multinational factories so many of these goods cross the border multiple times. I'm blanking out on the name of this phenomenon, but the places where things are assembled.
Well, the place called Mexico. And
right, but the name of
I know what you mean. So historically, it was called Maquila.
Thank you. That's the word I could not remember.
But now it has a new name. So actually, it used to be called Maquila program, but now it's called IMEX, IMEX, IMEX. So basically, what the government of Mexico promotes or incentivizes is that companies can bring in raw materials without any duties, basically in bond, and then manufacture those into a finished product, and then export that finished product without any duties.
Right, yes. And we see this in other parts of the world where I have more in-depth familiarity with free trade zones or qualified industrial zones, QIZs, QIZs, depending on who you're talking to. So yes, that's the idea that there's a set of incentives around the importing of raw materials with a set of rules around what percentages must be inputs from, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure this gets very technical. What is the benefit of the IMEX program for both sides of the fence?
Well, it first started in the 70s, and then the main idea was to generate jobs. Yeah. Just create a location where companies can come in and manufacture it.
So take advantage of lower cost of labor.
Exactly.
I got you.
Yeah. And then some country in Asia copied the system, and now we're losing a lot of market to China. And now the current situation is that you have a lot of a change in technical and a lot of technologies being shared between companies in Mexico and the U.S. For example, across the border here in Sonora, you got a large number of Mexican companies doing automation because the U.S. or foreign companies require this type of services in Mexico. So the universities got a lot of new careers in place. So we have a lot of professionals in automation just across the border. And the same goes for aerospace engineers, mechanical, industrial, and especially another niche is software development and design.
I'm very glad you brought that up. I think it's so important to, and it's partly why I was asking this question and keep coming back to it. I want us to understand, I want our listeners to understand that we're not just talking about importing tomatoes or Ford, engine parts. We are talking about an extremely skilled, and Indira Jeffrey, you mentioned this in your opening remarks, a very skilled and increasingly developing skilled labor pool where high-tech, software, aerospace, engineering is all at play. And we need to understand that this is a mature economy with a skilled labor pool, and that doing business is a good idea for both sides of this family, if you will, this extended and sometimes dysfunctional family of ours called humanity. and I think that's really important. This brings us to the agreements that have historically governed these relationships. For me, growing up, it was NAFTA, and then more recently, we now need to talk about the evolution of NAFTA and the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. So let's talk about that for a minute, because at least at a high level, and certainly there's a sense of urgency given it has been signed but not ratified, and there's a lot of conversation around that. Let's talk about the USMCA. What is it? Why is it important? What needs to be done now to accelerate this important agreement?
I can start.
Please.
Actually, this is a subject that I'm very passionate about because, as many of you know, NAFTA started in 1994. And it was reviewed not a long time ago. And it has 34 chapters. So 34 chapters that are, including all the negotiations between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. One of the points I would like to remark right now, it is that it's not ratified by the U.S., as many of us know. And this is because the U.S., they are asking certain conditions for the U.S. to sign the agreement. And one of them is for the auto sector in Mexico, the minimum wage has to be $16. The wage right now is about $3 a day. So, and
a day?
A day.
A day.
Yes. And the minimum wage will be $16 per hour. So right there, the Mexican government, they have a lot to do, a lot of work to do to get from $3 a day to $16 per hour. So, well, many, they were saying that it may be ratified by the end of this year. I don't think so.
Well, certainly the Congress has been preoccupied with other things. But let's talk about the reality of this. So the agreement has been signed by the heads of state for a year now and has yet to be ratified.
Yes.
Which is an important step in bringing a treaty into force. Questions exist around the enforceability of the agreement, around labor protections. There are some folks who feel quite strongly that unless we can guarantee certain quality of life, et cetera, we don't want to be signatories to an agreement. There are others who have come out quite strongly and said, we need this. This is good for everyone, and we'll work out the details as we go. How much of this, in your personal view, and this is, I suppose it's a dicey question, how much of this is being driven by ideology and politics versus how much is being driven by substantive concerns that really do matter and that companies really do care about? What are your thoughts on that? What would you say is the status of these negotiations?
Well, I believe that associations or industry has been pretty clear. They needed to be ratified. A lot of long-term investment plans are being on hold just because of this. So I think it's pretty clear. I mean, industry and commerce is backing it up.
Right.
You hear it all the time. The Arizona Chamber of Commerce almost every 3 days has an announcement and says that we need to pass this.
Sure. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as well, taking a very active role nationally in legislative meetings, lobbying, urging this. Governor Ducey here in Arizona has been very vocal that Arizona's 9 congressional members need to move quickly on this if possible. Certainly, Congressman Stanton has been a leader in that regard.
Correct.
But there remains some concerns and reservations. And I guess the question I didn't ask very well, I'll try to take another stab at it, is how many of those concerns and reservations do you feel are legitimate substantive issues that really do need to be addressed versus the kind of politics and wheeling and dealing? And
well, to that, I can say that, Mexico is the main partner for Arizona in business. 63,000 jobs depend on trade in Arizona.
It's the de facto reality.
Exactly.
Regardless of.
Right. And you mentioned tomatoes. That's a really important fact. If you take tomatoes, I think the U.S. and Canada, between the U.S. and Canada, they import about 2 billion pounds, which is about 3.5 billion pounds of tomatoes, which is in fact close to $2 billion. But the impact in that economy is pretty impressive. The University of Arizona did a study on this. They took figures from 2016. So only tomatoes generate 33,000 jobs. And the impact on the GDP is $2.9 billion. $1.4 billion is employee compensation. $353 million is business owner income, and $400 million is total tax only by tomatoes. So you have to add automotive and all the manufacturing parts and all the $600 billion that Gabriela mentioned. So there's the answer.
So it's important, and there's a lot of business at stake.
Right.
Well, Congress figures out how and when to deal with this. It's unfortunate, I think, for certainly the business community would say that it is taking second place to other concerns, not because those concerns aren't legitimate, but because this issue is urgent and needs to be resolved. Gabriela, as you advise businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises, to enter or expand into the Mexican market, what are some of the core issues that come up over and over again? What are some of the key themes that you often find yourself talking to business owners or executive teams about?
I would say that they have to follow certain steps, because what I've seen, according to my experience, I've seen some companies, not only American companies, not to follow some steps, and they think that it's easy to do it. And first of all, they need to know if they are export ready or not. Maybe they are not. They have to know if they are export ready because they already export, if they are market ready because the markets are different. Don't think that because you speak Spanish and you are from a Latin American country, you can go to another Latin American country. The cultures are really different. You have to, does a company have a international plan in their business plan? Maybe not. Do they have the capacity of going abroad? The capacity, I'm talking about resources. Have they thought if the market that they are targeting, it's the good market for their product? There are many steps to follow. Are they ready to transform all the documents into the language of in this case into Spanish? Are they ready to do business in a different way than in the US? Are you ready to travel to Mexico 2, 3, 4 times because the buyer, that's what it's expecting? So there are many steps to follow that some companies don't do. And sometimes they overestimate that it's easy and they can do it, and they fail or they lose money. I mean, failure like losing money. At the end, they arrive, but they lose money.
Right.
And business is about money.
Indira Jeffrey, you mentioned earlier that you also work with companies, particularly on cross-cultural communication, marketing, but also relationship building, business development. What are some of the key themes or issues that you see through that lens? What are the things that companies need to be thinking about or dealing with in order to be effective at a cross-border business environment?
Yes, and unfortunately, it's for both sides because Mexico, companies in Mexico, they think just because they come on vacation and they know some of the culture, they are ready to do business, but it's not that. I think here the main element is to have by your side someone that is an expert on the Mexican side and on the American side. How you can improve that with mainly with cross-cultural communication, and this is knowing the culture of the other country, the business culture, because one thing is like when you go on vacations and a different thing is doing business there. Also, what are the main issues with the government? For example, in Mexico, they have had a lot of improvement regarding their processes, government processes. Used to be very bureaucratic. Right now, I think there is less than before. And also here in the United States, for the Mexicans coming to the United States, they have to know that everything has a structure. And also the business, the time is money. And you have to come ready with all the elements your product needs, like, for example, labels. What are the requirements a label needs? Also, for example, size. Maybe, if you are going to export a certain product, but the size is too big or too small for the U.S. consumer, you have to take in consideration those details. The packaging, exactly. The packaging, but also the size of the product. Because, for example, for let's say tomatoes, the tomatoes, they have to have a certain size. And not all the tomatoes that are growing in Mexico can come to the United States.
And is this because of consumer taste or because of regulatory restrictions or both?
They have to do with the consumer perception.
Yes.
Yes. Because let's say that a tomato that is bigger than the usual for the American consumer, they are going to be, what is that? That is not a tomato. And also vice versa, for certain products in Mexico, they have to have certain size because also, for example, the high of the medium of the Mexican people population is lower than Americans. I'm talking in this case for textiles, clothing. So there are a lot of requirements that you have to take in consideration when you are exporting or importing.
You know, it's amazing what 100 years of mass production and mass consumption have done to perception of reality. The fact that we have to call heirloom tomatoes by a special name because they look weird compared, whereas 100 years ago, we might have just called it tomatoes and everybody understood because they grew their own, had more of a relationship to, they come in different shapes and sizes and deformations and whatever. Now, if it's not this round, red thing, we don't even recognize it's a tomato, which is fascinating to me as an anthropologist that we have lost our relationship to some of those things. When it comes to some of the cross-border business relationships, I'd be interested in hearing about what's really working well. What are some of the organizations that are supporting business owners in creating direct relationships? The Global Chamber is, of course, one of them, but I know there are other initiatives. There's support, whether it's provided by economic development folks or independent, private sector, nonprofits. What are the different venues or opportunities where somebody who maybe has a product they've been thinking about expanding into the Mexican market, for example, might turn to get support, to find a community of peers that they can interact with? Is this something that you deal with or that you see much of?
Yeah. I think business is a little bit like water. It will find its own way, its own path.
Sure.
So, but of course, businesses thrives on the support and the business community and the service providers. And I think there's no lack of service professionals like Indira and Gabriela and myself. There are supporting companies that want to go into a market and narrow that learning curve, shorten it. And of course, Mexican government and U.S. government have their own organizations like U.S. Trade, Chambers of Commerce. Locally, the ACA has a Mexico City office, and they recently opened, I believe, in Israel, they opened an office. They have an office in L.A. And of course, the cities used to have some sort of support for them. But still, businesses, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of assistance that is needed. And of course, there's a lack of education for people on both sides of the border. Mexican thinks it's pretty easy to sell, find a customer here. And the U.S. think that it's very easy just to go there and manufacture. There is a way to doing things now, like not only business translation, but also the way of doing things, the cultural part. And we are here to help those type of companies. And like I said, they're like Global Chamber. They do a great outreach to 500 cities, and they do a great effort. I mean, they have a great platform where you can video conference, talk about issues. Yesterday, we had a roundtable around Latin America. So we had people from Argentina, we have people in Costa Rica and Puerto Rico. Well, Costa Rica is the U.S., but it still is in Latin America.
Puerto Rico's in the U.S.
I'm sorry.
Costa Rica's in Central
I apologize.
America.
Yeah, it was from Puerto Rico. But yeah, I think there's a lot of education that has to be done.
Well, you raise a very important point. Let's follow up on this. What are some of the key things you all see that where education needs to happen? So we've talked a bit about cultural dynamics, norms, and expectations. It goes beyond, as you say, Eduardo, business translation. So simply having your English communication translated into Spanish is insufficient for a true cultural connection. But there are operational concerns. There are go-to-market strategies. What are some of the core topics that you feel people need to be educated on in order to make these relationships work better?
I think it will be more as the perception again, and be open. You need to have a global mindset I'm a Thunderbird graduate, so, the global mindset is important for me. And also, I think a lot has to do with our leaders. Because, like, for example, we were talking about the organizations between Arizona and Mexico. The Arizona-Mexico Commission, they are doing great things, approaching to the government in Mexico and also the Mexican government. Like, for example, I'm originally from Guanajuato. They are open to come and talk to our leaders in here in Arizona and try to see how they can have a better business and agreements between both, in this case, states, Guanajuato and Arizona. In 2017, it was an initiative by HSU and the government of Governor Ducey about a trade mission to go to Guanajuato, Mexico City and Guanajuato. On that trade mission, we were 70 people. 35 were representatives from the government and 35 business owners. To me, it was a great experience because when we were to Mexico City, we were greeted by the mayor of Mexico City and also by the Secretary of Economic Development. When we went to Guanajuato, the mayor of Guanajuato and also the governor were there. And it was a great experience for the Americans because some of them, they never went that far to Mexico City to visit or to Guanajuato, that is in the middle of the country. And when they came back, they had a very different perspective of what Mexico is.
I think perspective, as somebody who's, as a function of my own privilege and as my own inclination working together, I've had a chance to travel to a lot of different places. And if there was one thing, if I could wave a magic wand, if I had that ability and could change one thing, it would be to give everybody perspective. And perspective comes from proximity. In other words, unless you've been there, unless you've been close to something and you can see it for what it is, and then you get some distance from yourself and the things you took for granted. I imagine on these trade missions, I haven't been on one. I'm open to invitations. You must see, listen, wow, you do this just like us. And equally, wow, you do this so differently than us. And those two things kind of together pulling from opposite ends really change the way you think about what's possible and what's required and who you need to be to show up and connect and contribute in that way. Gabriela Castro, I'm interested in your point of view here as well. What are some of the key themes that you think people need to be more educated about? What are some of the key issues that you wish one or both sides of this relationship were more aware of?
I think that the most, to be open. I lived in France and in Canada because I studied there. And really, each culture is different, even if they speak the same language. Of course, I think that they have to speak the language of the culture. And I mean with the language, not only Spanish. You have to do the way Mexicans do. You have to eat the way Mexicans eat. You have to be there hand by hand to understand the culture. Because if you want to do business, you have to know that meetings are long meetings. You talk about family. You eat tacos. You eat spicy. You drink tequila. You drink mezcal. You have to be really like acting like a Mexican if you want to do business with them. It's not. I've heard many times, not only Americans, many other people saying, in my country, we do business like this. I say, okay, so don't do business in other countries. You have to get accustomed to do business in a different way in this global world if you really want to succeed.
Yeah, there's a flexibility of mindset and expectations that I think is required to meet people where they are. I mean, the stereotype of the ugly American and unfortunately it's a stereotype that has some truth to it, and that's why it's persisted, is that of someone imposing their own norms everywhere they go, demanding everybody meet them where they are in their ways of being and acting and moving in the world. So whether or not you are passing as Mexican in Mexico is not so much the point as, are you willing to be flexible, to participate and to be open? In other words, it's the absence of rigidity seems to make a big difference. That's just my opinion, having been a few places, about what really matters and how what really brings people together. You know, communicating that you are willing to do things a different way than you thought you needed to do them.
Exactly.
Without compromising core principles, obviously, on either side. But that's what makes this grand human experiment so interesting, and what makes the opportunities so rich. We're coming up on the end of our conversation here, but I do have one question for everybody, which is, from where you sit, you see things in some ways the same, in some ways differently. But I'm curious, what are some of the top opportunities that you wish more people were aware of or taking action on? What are some of the key things, as we wrap up this conversation, you'd like to say, this is something I want more people to know about? Let's just work our way around the table and see what comes to mind. Indira Jeffrey?
Well, you know, I'm a member with the Global Chamber. I think a lot of people knows about the Global Chamber and all the benefits that this organization offers. But it's not just the networking, it's also the connections, high quality connections. And I think it's a very good opportunity for anyone who wants to go to a different country, meaning business-wise, to belong to the Global Chamber. Also, what I would like to highlight is that just be open-minded to new cultures, new languages, and to read about, you know, to be informed about other cultures too.
Marvelous. Thank you very much. Gabriela Castro, key opportunities that you see you wish more people were aware of?
Globally, there's business everywhere. Look for the opportunities. Open your mind and see that there are opportunities everywhere. Go abroad, meet people, learn a different language, which is very important. And of course, serve the world. We are here to serve everybody.
Very well said indeed. Eduardo González, what about you? What are the top things you wish more people were aware of or taking action on? Well,
I think they should know there is a big market next door, 130 million Mexicans. Mexico has free trade agreements with 46 countries, so it's a great platform for exports. And also talent. If you're searching for talent or struggling in the U.S., maybe you can find it abroad. And most importantly, I want to make people aware of my website, if I can.
Absolutely. That's a key resource.
So it's mexicomanufacturing258.com.
Wonderful.
I'll be happy to help.
Especially for folks that are looking for specific tactical advice in those areas of expertise of yours, it would be foolish not to go there. And we'll link up everybody's websites and social profiles and things, because I really think the three of you are among the opportunities I wish more people knew about. And there's one more. The Global Chamber has a summit coming up here in Phoenix on December 10. This is Global to Local Innovation Summit. The topic is sustaining growth. It's going to be at SkySong, ASU SkySong, and the lineup of speakers is incredible. The program is going to run from, I think, 12:30 until the evening, 7 o'clock or so. I encourage everybody here in the Valley to take a look at this. You might not realize immediately how much value you would get from attending something like this, but from senators to global leaders to business leaders to experts like yourselves, this is where a lot of these kind of conversations, relationships, connections are going to get made. You can get all the information about the Global Chambers Summit on the website, which is globalchamber.org. I'll be there. I'm looking forward to meeting folks there as well and listening to not only the speakers, but networking and connecting with folks who are in attendance. I want to thank our guests for this conversation today. Indira Jeffrey, Business Development Partner with EKATAR, Gabriela Castro, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Trade in Motion, and Eduardo González, President at 258 Consulting. Thank you all for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. A pleasure.
For all of us here at Business Radio X, this is Dr. Adrian McIntyre, and we'll see you next time on Valley Business Radio.